I'm Asger. You can ask me anything. Today I'm going to try and answer this question. Is vanity bad? The reason I'm talking about this is that I sometimes catch myself judging other people when I perceive them as being too vain, but at the same time I have to realize that I am vain myself, and I don't like seeing myself as a hypocrite, and I'm sure you can relate to this. Now, I remember in my early adulthood, I think I was even more inclined to judge people who I perceived to be vain. But recently I started asking myself, is it even logical? And this hypocrisy, most people intuitively say that vanity is bad, but at the same time, they laud people, celebrities for instance, who are clearly vain, and they also pursue goals of vanity in some sense themselves. So there just seems to be something going on here, right? So where can we start our search for this? Well, I grew up in a country with a long Christian tradition, even though I grew up in a secular household. So I think it's reasonable to ask ourselves, is this culture or is it biology? Now, there could be some biological influences here, especially from an evolutionary perspective, that if some people seem to gather a little too many resources and you don't have any resources, it seems sort of natural that we team up with the other people who don't have too many resources against the people who have excessive amounts of resources. But there seems to be clear cultural differences in our perceptions of vanity, and therefore I suspect that we should probably start the search looking at culture. One of the biggest cultural influences in the culture I grew up in, back in Scandinavia and also here in the US, obviously, is Christianity. So I actually turned to the Bible for once, looking for some quotes that deal with vanity. Now, many of the quotes I found, it wasn't obvious to me that they were actually about vanity, but I did find several passages that mention it explicitly. So let's have a look at a few of those. Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 30 states, "What are you doing, you devastated one? Why dress yourself in scarlet and put on jewels of gold?" Whatever that is. "Why highlight your eyes with makeup? You adorn yourself in vain. Your lovers despise you. They want to kill you." You think that people like you because you put on superficial markers, but in fact, they have the opposite effect. You do have lovers, but in reality, they despise you and they want to kill you. So there's clearly a negative bias towards vanity here. But it actually seems to be from a sort of a utilitarian perspective. But another passage tells us much more about what we want to know. And again, I just want to stress, I am by no stretch of the imagination a biblical scholar. I've read a good chunk of it many, many years ago just to inform myself. But Galatians chapter 5, verses 16 and 17. "So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They are in conflict with each other, so that you are not to do whatever you want." This is really interesting, right? So the Bible's moral perspective on this seems to be that there is a direct conflict between matters of spirituality, spiritual well-being, or spiritual truth, probably from the biblical perspective, and your biological desires. This is actually quite insightful when we consider how long ago this was written. But the question is, of course, in this modern day and age, and from a more utilitarian perspective, do you harm yourself or others by being vain? To me, that's sort of the big question here. So, but I think this is probably a relatively good bet on why I have this intuitive, or had maybe rather, this intuitive negative reaction to vanity. I think there's also some other cultural influences to find in my Scandinavian native environment, so to speak, and I'm going to do a video dedicated to that, so hang on for that. For me personally, the question really is, do you harm yourself or others by being vain? So for me, vanity is not like an on-off switch. It's not binary in any sense. Either you're vain or you're not. We all have some degree of vanity, right? You could say that any person who spends more than 1 second deliberating on whether to buy this shirt or that shirt or the blue pants or the black pants, or who even goes to a hairdresser every now and then. You could say that all those people are vain, right? But that makes no sense. Society actually even sort of demands just a tiny amount of vanity from us, insofar that we have a workplace that we attend. So to me, it's a continuum of priorities, I guess we could call it. So over here, we have as close to 0 as you can possibly be. Over here, we have, let's call it a straight 100. You're completely self-absorbed. All your actions have to do with your physical appearance, your social reputation, your status. This is clinical. This may also be clinical, but there is probably a wide chunk of this spectrum that can be classified as healthy and normal vanity. I do know a few people who have made choices in the past that struck me as completely bizarre and illogical. People who were completely broke, and the minute they got a hold of some money, they would spend that money on what we could call beauty accessories. That strikes me as completely nuts. I would probably say that that is where I draw the line. And again, as in most of these videos I record, for me, it ends up ultimately being a utilitarian question. Are you hurting yourself and the people that are close to you? Or are you simply being aware that looking good, being healthy, or at least seeming to be healthy, appearing to be well-dressed, I mean, sometimes it really makes social situations just a little easier. And I gotta be honest with you, every now and then I also catch myself actually judging people. And this is something that just happens automatically, and then I catch myself doing it. But I judge people whom I perceive to not be self-aware enough to be vain at all. And what I mean by that is, I think, at least this is a post hoc rationalization here, of course, but I think what I mean by that is that I see people, maybe they wear dirty clothes and they come to a social event not really having considered what they're wearing. I mean, that seems to me to also be a potential character flaw. So that's probably my conclusion here, just to sum up. I think vanity is only a problem insofar that it skews your priorities and it may hurt your family. Maybe you spend your last money on plastic surgery and your kids are starving. I mean, I know this sounds extreme, but it actually isn't. I've actually known people who have been in sort of this situation. But at the other end of the spectrum, dressing yourself up nicely, not necessarily in jewels of gold, etc., but just the simple things, taking a shower, using some perfume, putting on some nice clothing before you go to dinner at your friend's place, etc. It sort of signals that I am aware that humans are social creatures and I'm interacting with other people, and that's the conclusion I'm going to leave you with right now. And if you enjoyed this video, if you found it valuable, please subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything. And I'm Asger. You can ask me anything, and please don't hesitate to do so in the comments below. And you'll see me again soon. Until then, have a good one. Thanks for watching. Cheers.